Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it is Monday, the 3rd of March, 2025. We're still reeling from events a couple of days ago in the Oval Office, scenes between Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky, which have caused headlines all over the world. J.D. Vance was involved as well. The Economist has an interesting cover this week, The Don's New World Order, borrowing from The Godfather. And we're all, of course, trying to make sense of Trump and his apparently New World Order. An old friend of the show, John Roush, had a very influential piece this week in The Atlantic. One word describes Trump. It's the most popular piece, even though he wrote it a week ago in The Atlantic. And it's borrowed from a book called The Assault on the State by Steve Hansen and Jeff Kopstein, old friends of mine who were on the show a few weeks ago. And I'm thrilled that both John and Jeff are joining me today. John, what is the one word that describes Trump, and how might it explain what happened in the Oval Office a couple of days ago?
The one word is patrimonialism, a multisyllabic disaster coined over 100 years ago by Max Weber. It is that system of government in which the government is run as the personal property and family business of the person in charge of the government, and loyalty to that individual supersedes all other arrangements. And that is what the Trump administration is in the process of imposing now.
I was really struck with Vance's behavior in that conversation. It was like a grown-up or a parent talking to a child and kept on telling him to say thank you and arguing that he'd been rude. Jeff, did this incident in the White House, in the Oval Office, did it, in your view at least, bring to mind your arguments about patrimonialism?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me on, John, for really getting the word out about this idea. So when Steve and I wrote this book, we were thinking really Weber says there are two ways of running administration. One is based on kind of loyalty to the individual, where the people follow the leader, the staff follows the leader because there's a sense of personal loyalty, personal affection. Think of kind of Don Corleone and his henchmen. The other reason that people might follow is because of the office and the rule of law, the person who holds it. Rather than being personalistic, like with The Godfather, it's highly impersonal. And really what you got that's more modern authority. And really what you got this sense out of that meeting with Zelensky is that we were dealing here with a kind of, he was going to meet the Don, not just Donald Trump, but the Godfather himself. And he did not show the proper personal deference, respect, did not kiss the ring. And so what applies to domestic politics applies equally as well to foreign policy. And we can talk at great length about how Trump's building not just a patrimonial state here, but a patrimonial world, making the world safe for patrimonialism.
Jeff, can I just ask one question, and then I'll bring you in, John? Isn't this a kind of postmodern patrimonialism, in the sense that at the end of that conversation, Trump victoriously, in his sense, it seemed victoriously, said, well, this is going to make great TV. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was making headlines. He was behaving in real time as a reality television or social media president. So this isn't back to some 11th century patrimonialism. It's very much a 21st century version, isn't it?
Well, my opinion of that is that really the idea of patrimonialism, from the word the father. Trump is playing the good father. And really what you had there is there were attack dogs at the side, and they were going at it. And then as will happen with the good father steps back and say, look, it's going to be okay. Here's how you children should actually play together. And Trump did that as well. So, I don't think we should get all caught up with the particular technology at any given moment in time. This is, an attempt to reconstruct a highly personalistic regime. And the fact that we're doing it with computers, I don't think is really germane to the conversation. I mean, it may affect how it unrolls, but the core elements, right? The core elements are really remarkably kind of similar to an order that we had thought had kind of been, put on the put into the dustbin of history.
John, I'm sorry I interrupted you earlier. I wasn't trying to be patrimonial, of course.
No, my fault. Well, I was just going to point out the actual first scene of the movie Godfather consists of Don Corleone saying, "You come to me, you want a favor, and yet you have shown me no respect until now. Where is the respect?" And you've got J.D. Vance playing the role of the consigliere saying, "Yeah, where's the respect for the boss?" So in that sense, it's right out of the movie.
Yeah, and Jeff, when we did our original interview a few weeks ago, we talked about that scene from The Godfather, the most famous scene.
I think we should stay on it from that.
And in a kind of conceptual sense, of course, what was being offered in that scene was two kinds of authority: the authority of the state and the authority of the Godfather. And the fellow who came into the Godfather's office had had his daughter raped by a couple of boys. And he hadn't come originally to the Godfather. He trusted the state. The state let him down. So he was now choosing the Godfather. Is that an essential either or, even when it comes to Trump? Ironically enough, Trump is supposed to be running the state. He isn't running a mafia organization.
I don't know. Are you sure? Are you so sure about that?
Well, he is and he isn't. I mean, he's sort of combined the two. You have these merging of the two worlds.
To make it more, the Mario Puzo's Godfather is a wonderful outlining of the existence of a patrimonial island of authority within a modern state. And so what happened, to repeat that scene, right, when the undertaker Buenasera comes to see him and says, "My daughter's been raped. I went," and he goes, "Well, why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you go to the state?" He goes, "I did." And what they got was suspended sentence. What does that mean? I want justice. And he goes, "Look, you should have come to me first, right? Because we would have been friends. And if people would know that I'm your friend, they would have feared me, right?" And so the basis of obedience there, right, is really, it's friendship, it's respect, it's fear. And at the very end of the scene, right, he kisses the ring, right? And so we use that expression today, to kiss the ring, that Zelensky was supposed to have kissed the ring and he didn't. That was his delict. And, everybody's talking now, like, how does he get out of this? He needs to apologize, right? The idea that he needs to apologize for something he didn't even do. And this is really, brings it back. And so you're saying it's actually not the mafia. He's running it as if it were the mafia, right? And of course, there's still a state there, right? There's still a state. But over time, as John talks about in his article, right, over time, if this keeps on going, right, it will more and more kind of asymptotically approach the ideal of the mafia state.
John, let's give Trump the benefit of the doubt. Neither of you will, so I will. In his arguments on Ukraine, of course, he wasn't really juxtaposing the authority of the state versus the mafia. He was juxtaposing his own authority with the authority of Biden. I think the implications in the meeting and the narrative, his narrative around it, was he gets stuff done, whereas Biden doesn't. And Biden's state was a rational, bureaucratic one. His state is, maybe, to borrow Jeff's term, patrimonial or charismatic, whatever you want to describe it as. Can we give Trump, I know the answer is going to be no, but can we give him any benefit of the doubt here, in the sense that he's suggesting to Zelensky, he knows Zelensky wants peace, that he can get something done. And so Zelensky has to kind of so to speak, kiss the ring or reinvent himself as well. And the old way doesn't work. In the same way as in The Godfather, the police did nothing for the man whose daughter was raped, and that forced him to go to The Godfather.
Well, you put your finger, Andrew, on the appeal, or one of the appeals of patrimonialism, as Jeff in his book and Steve Hansen point out. Patrimonialism, not modern bureaucratic democracy, is the default and standard form of government throughout history. And one of its appeals is, look, we can just cut through the red tape. We can cut through the bullshit. If you know the guy in charge, his word will get it done. You just have to be friends with that person. You have to stay on his good side. So yeah, that's exactly the promise that's made. Also, as the book points out, the problem with patrimonialism is that it's invariably incompetent and it's invariably corrupt. It makes the promise that I can cut through all this stuff and help you. But on the other hand, it disables the bureaucracy. It fires all the good people that are in it. It gets rid of all the processes that are needed to run a modern state and a modern military. And it changes its mind. So you can't count on it. You make friends with Trump one day and the next day he throws you under the bus. So in a modern environment, it just won't work.
But Jeff, is that true? I mean, in The Godfather, I know that's fiction. The word of The Godfather was good. He may not be Trump in that sense, because you can never Trump. You can never Trump Trump, and you can never trust Trump. Wasn't the problem that rational bureaucratic system in The Godfather didn't work? And in some ways, the appeal of Trumpism today is that whether it's in the international system or the American bureaucratic state, it simply doesn't work.
Well, I mean, there's really kind of two predictions that follow from our book, right? And one is that, as John said, you'll kind of disempower the experts, right? The people who are really qualified to do all of this. And then with that, two things will happen. One is that, and one is fast moving and one is slow moving. There will be a crisis. We always know within a presidency, there's going to be a crisis, whether it was COVID or something like that. And the question is, do you have people around who can actually help you address this crisis in a kind of a satisfactory way? The reason we have modern authority, as John said, is because the other ways, they were pretty good at using force, right? At kind of killing people. Pre-modern states could do that. They were good at that, but they just couldn't do the kind of high regulation, highly complex tasks that modern states do. So that's the first thing on the kind of the fast moving problem. The second moving problem, the second prediction that really follows from the book, is a systematic under-provision of public goods. Because as more and more of state administration becomes corrupt and in the hands of private people, the resources that we need, right, to build our airports. Here I am near LA. We need LAX to be rebuilt, right? To rebuild airports, to fund universities, to build highways, to do all the things that modern states do, and make sure, by the way, that our water is pure, that our air is clean, all the things. I mean, the modern state is kind of everywhere and invisible. And over time, these states, as they become more and more patrimonial, will not be able to do those things anymore. And what we'll see is a kind of an increasing kind of shabbiness, right? We already sense that's what's going, there's a bit of that going on. Our prediction is Steve and I predict that gets worse, much worse.
John, of course, if we had a Trump person on, they would bring up Elon Musk and suggest that he and his Doge, Department of Government Efficiency people, are actually reforming the state. How, in your view, does Musk fit into this and his quote unquote assault on the state? Before we went live, you're based in DC. You told me of a number of your friends who either have lost their jobs or are about to lose them or fear losing their jobs. I was in DC last week, and it's everyone you meet, it's all they're talking about. Either their wives or their husbands or their friends or their kids or their parents are losing their jobs.
Well, Musk and all of that is a classic example of what patrimonialism hates most is regulated, formalistic, bureaucratic procedures for a bunch of reasons. Those procedures are not directly loyal to the people in charge of the government, so they're not trustworthy. They are slow and cumbersome, and if you're a patrimonialist ruler, you want to pay off your friends and punish your enemies. You don't really care what the Domestic Policy Council has to say about it or what the the Government Accountability Office has to say. So what you do is you go out and you find someone who donated almost $300 million to your campaign, and you say to that person, who's an individual who has no standing with the government, has never had a Senate confirmed role, has no experience in government, and you tell that person, you be my man, you walk into whatever building you want to in the government, and just on my personal authority, rip the place open. Look for savings, do whatever you want to do. And that's what's happening. I'm sure that Mr. Musk and his team may find some worthwhile savings. I'm also sure that they are shutting down entire agencies simply because they don't like them. These are congressionally chartered agencies. So what they're doing, circumventing Congress, circumventing the rule of law. That's what patrimonialism does. And in a year from now, we are going to see the smoldering remains of a lot of incompetent execution.
Jeff, it's not just Musk. I'm talking to you from the West Coast. He's quite popular in some parts, certainly in Silicon Valley. There are a lot of other people very sympathetic to what Musk is doing. There's Thiel, of course, Mark Andreessen. They're all arguing that the state has grown too large. It's inefficient, it's corrupt, it's bloated. It doesn't encourage people to be accountable and take responsibility for their own lives. Is there any truth in any of those arguments? I mean, can't one believe in a bureaucratic state and still be opposed to bureaucratic waste?
Absolutely. One could definitely, and no one really, I mean, the kinds of things we've been arguing about for 70 years in the United States, right, is how large or how small the state should be, the level of taxation in order to support that. That's not what we're talking about here. What John was just mentioning, we're talking about a kind of a search and destroy mission, right? This is the first stage of this is sort of what really makes modern patrimonialism different from the old one. The old one didn't have to deal with an already existing modern state, right? And so the new one, the first stage it's got to do, it's got to demolish that existing modern state. And that's the stage we're going through now. The second stage, however, is then you're going to have to repopulate it. And that's when you're going to get the loyalists, right? You're going to have to now, it may not be as populated as it was before. We'll see. Or it may be more. There's a whole faction of the Trump movement, if you will, which actually wants to have quite a large state, but a large state of loyalists. I mean, really, there are three groups who are interested in assaulting the state. One is the libertarians that you were just talking about from the Silicon Valley. The second are the kind of Christian nationalists who view the state as a kind of a secular organization that is kind of has driven religion from the public sphere where it properly belongs. And the third is the believers in kind of unfettered executive authority. And while those three groups don't always agree with each other, and you can figure out all the kinds of ways in which they don't, they can all agree that Trump's going to give them something of what they want. The problem is at the end of all of this, what you're going to get, as John just said, is a lot of incompetent loyalists. It could be a bloated bureaucracy. It could be a minimal bureaucracy. We don't know the answer to that question yet because we're only going through the demolition phase now. But no matter what, the principle that you're recruiting people based on merit and you're keeping them depoliticized by giving them civil service protections, that is being thrown out the window very quickly.
Jeff, many years ago, you and I studied Lenin and Leninism together. Is there I always thought Bannon's very influential in Trump and Trumpist thinking. And he seems to me to be a Leninist from the right. Lenin, of course, was famous for wanting to seize the state. Is there a Leninist quality to all this? Have they learned from the master of power?
It's so funny you raised that. He did use one phrase earlier on that is straight from Lenin, where he says he wants to smash the administrative state. Right? Yeah. That's smash the state. That's Lenin pure, right? The administrative is, of course, a very modern ideal, which we can talk about. Um, you know, there's a very interesting dispute that's worth watching between Musk and Bannon. Right? Bannon has criticized Musk as being a techno-feudalist, and which was really wonderful in a New York Times interview. And what's interesting is that people are constantly looking is there a divide, a kind of a split within the Trumpist movement that's going to cause a huge problem? And my prediction is no. I don't think so. I think that's the whole idea of patrimonialism, is the good father stays above it all and lets the children squabble. And then when the squabbling has ended, he sort of steps back in and says, may I be of some assistance here, right?
And Stalin was very good at that, wasn't he? Rather than
absolutely. And so this type of leader is good at that. And the good father is especially good at that. So that's my quick and dirty take on Leninism within the regime.
John, your excellent piece in The Atlantic, essential reading for anyone who hasn't read it yet. One word describes Trump. But what does Trump want here? I mean, he hasn't been reading his Weber and hasn't saying, well, I'm going to be a patrimonial leader. I don't think he can I'm not sure he can read, certainly not read Max Weber. It's hard to read even for literati like ourselves. I mean, what does he want here? Does he want to just shrivel the entire state down to some big family so that he really does literally become Don Corleone and we all go in there and kiss the ring like he wants Zelensky to do?
If you want to know what Trump wants, you are asking the wrong person. It's easier to say what he doesn't want. He does not want, I think, a classic authoritarian state, which is what Stalin built. That's where you have all those big, heavy structures like secret police and the big bureaucracies and the Politburo and the propaganda agencies. I think it's also pretty clear that he's not a libertarian. He doesn't really care about the size of government. He doesn't even care about waste, fraud, and abuse. You'll see a much larger, not much smaller debt and deficit under Trump. I don't think he's ideological. The best explanation I heard is from John Bolton, his former national security advisor, who said in an interview, Trump's not an ideologue. He just looks out at the world and he looks at President Xi and President Putin and President Kim, and he says, why can't I have the same amount of fun that they do?
Do they have a lot of fun?
You know, isn't it great to have everyone kissing your ring and to have everyone loyal to you and to have, you know, you say frog and people jump? I think maybe that's what he wants. And it certainly was the way he treated Volodymyr Zelensky. There was no goal to that meeting with Zelensky. You know, usually when heads of state meet, there's a lot of protocol and someone has thought through, what are we trying to get to? And this was just about, look, I want you to kiss my ring in public. That's it.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what he wants.
You talk about the only thing really Trump is interested in his own private property. Some of the headlines today are on his initiatives in crypto, for example, where he's created something called a U.S. crypto reserve, which seems to be just an excuse for him to amass a massive fortune. Maybe when he's comparing himself, particularly to Putin, he's thinking, why can't I be as rich as Putin, who is perhaps, we don't know, but perhaps his own personal wealth might rival even Elon Musk's.
I don't know. You tell me. I suspect it has more to do with
what do you think? I mean, what does he? I mean, John's got the one word, patrimonialism. What do patrimonial leaders generally want? I mean, they're from within patrimonial systems. So it's like asking fish about water. It just sort of comes naturally to them. How does a traditional patrimonial leader think or not think? What are their goals? And how is Trump similar or different?
So I think when we use the word corruption, right, and I think it's a great implication of John's article, and he uses it to great effect. The word corruption, as Steve and I talked about, Hanson and I talked about this after we read John's article, and he said, the word corruption itself depends upon the existence of a separate public and private realm. Once you've eliminated that, the word corruption loses its meaning. So in a truly patrimonial regime, there is no corruption, right? That is the use of public office for private ends, right? Which is the definition, our definition of corruption, right? That doesn't exist in a patrimonial regime. So so under a truly consolidated regime like that, nobody would look at Trump as that. Yes, of course he gets more, and if he wants to turn Gaza into a privately owned Miami Beach, that's fine. And if all three of us have to mine strategic metals in Don Jr.'s gulag in Greenland, right? That's fine too, because you know what? They deserve no less. And if Elon Musk will get $400 million or how much ever money in orders for those Tesla trucks, right? That's no big deal under that kind of regime. It's accepted. And in return, however, right? In return, the father must take care of his children, right? So if he can make things work, that's usually what they do. They do like big projects like Putin in the Olympics, like the Sochi Olympics, right? If you could rebuild LAX, right? I use LAX a lot, so I'm using it as a running example.
It's not that bad, LAX. I mean, it's better than Chicago or Atlanta.
We could go there, but
or Dallas, actually, John's local airport.
Big infrastructure projects that can make a big difference. So what he wants, right? He can't articulate it the way we just did just now, right? But the way he thinks about the world, and you can see he's always talking about individuals. Was this person nice to me? Was that person nice to me? Was this person loyal? Was that person loyal? It's never about the United States, our national interest. I mean, the whole vocabulary of talking about that, it's really alien to him. So he may not have the kind of the theory of it, but he comes to it from kind of it's second nature. Weber talks how about it's very difficult to staff a state. It's very difficult to do that. And people like Trump, right? They just don't take anybody. Max Weber, his idea of staffing a state, where patrimonialism comes from, he says, look, under most conditions, right, leaders have no means for actually staffing their organizations. And so what they do is they choose family and friends. And he talks about the extended household, right? So you think of Mar-a-Lago as the extended household and all the hangers on there, right? And the kinds of people he's chosen, right? I know it sounds funny, right? But this is the reality we're living in right now. And it's not going to be funny. It's funny until it's not anymore, right? And so that's how he's proceeding. And what he wants is a state that's built on personal loyalty, not on procedures, not on the kind of impersonal rule of law expertise that has characterized our lives until now. All three of us were sort of old, right? That's the lives we've been living until now. And it's hard to see the other side, right? What that other side may look like, because it's in the process of being born.
Andrew,
John,
just if I could just amend that, Andrew, the question properly maybe shouldn't be why does Trump want the things he wants? It's why were things ever different from the way Trump wanted? What he's doing is the traditional natural standard system of government. That's what most monarchies are, right? It belongs to the head of state. And we all pay loyalty to that person. So the real question is, why did we manage to sustain something different from that until January 20th of 2025?
John, Trump hasn't made any great secret of that. Even, I think, recently talked about being king. You're a constitutional scholar immersed in American history. I think James Madison is your great hero. What is happening here? Is this, again, some comic or tragic comic interlude in American history? The guy was elected. He never made any secret about any of this. I mean, Jeff and Hanson have done a great job teasing this out in Weberian terms. You don't need to be a Weberian scholar to understand this. The majority of Americans voted for him. I think he still has more than 50% approval. What is happening here? When an American president boasts about being king and doesn't dress up, so to speak, his ambition to become the American Don Corleone.
I think his approvals are below 50, and
But they're around 50. So
yeah, they're around 50. I just want to deprive him of that thing. I ask myself that question, Andrew, every day, and it's the sort of thing that I would turn to a smart foreign British journalist for an answer for, someone like you, because I don't understand it. You're correct. Trump was very clear about what he wanted to do. I wrote an article for The Atlantic in August 2022, predicting that he would do the things he's now doing, and he's doing them all right on cue, much faster than I expected. That's different. He's doing in weeks what I thought would take months, and months what I thought would take years. My best guess, but you tell me, but my best guess is that the average American thought Joe Biden was a failed president, wanted to see an end to the chaos that they saw in Afghanistan and Ukraine and the Middle East, and thought prices were too high. And the Republicans were the out party, and so they voted for change. And I don't really think they paid much attention to the kind of thing that we're talking about. They think they saw government as big and bloated and distant, and wanted to see it reformed, but didn't really know what that meant. And I don't know that this will get their attention, really, unless and until the Social Security or Medicare checks dry up.
So
why don't know. What do you think?
Americans, why are they not profoundly offended by a president who isn't shy to express his ambition to be a king, which is supposedly what the Republic was founded against?
Again, I ask myself that every day. Now, a lot of them are, there's almost half of the public would rather vote for a dead skunk in the middle of the road than for what they're seeing now. But you tell me. I rack my brains. It's partly because we stopped teaching civics. A lot of people just don't know. A lot of it is voter ignorance, and there's a lot of anger at the government. Some of that is understandable. But at the end of the day, if you ask me how the American people with their eyes wide open in 2024 could have supported this, I don't know. I just don't know.
Let's bring in our Weber scholar, Jeff Kopstein, who teaches at UC Irvine. Jeff, you built your excellent argument on assault on the state around Weber. You've been studying him all your life. Weber himself is as well known for his theory of the iron cage and the Protestant ethic as he is about patrimonialism. Didn't Weber warn us about this? And wasn't his great fear not so much Trump, but bureaucratization?
In a way, I mean, Weber makes an argument, a famous argument, in his book, the Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And he said, look, the world has developed, and the world has developed capitalism. And it developed capitalism for a whole range of reasons. And one of them was because of Protestantism. And I won't get into that argument right here. But he says at the very end of the book, he goes, how long is this going to last, this capitalism business, right? And he says, it's not going to end. It's never going to end. What happens after global capitalism is global capitalism. And at last, he says, until the last lump of coal is burned. Why does he say that? He says, because this idea of rationality, you can't put it away. It's not going to go away. You're always going to have bureaucracy. You're always going to have markets. And if you try to construct a world in which those don't exist, he was in favor of markets and in favor of bureaucracy. He said, if you construct a world in which those don't exist, what you're going to go to is some form of ancient Egypt, right? And so he actually, when he starts talking about the Soviet Union, remember, the Soviet Union just came into existence a few years before he dies. He says, he took a look at that. He goes, they're calling that communism, but that really looks some kind of like they're trying to build the pyramids there, right? It looks awful. And what he thought was they were building this new tyrannical form of patrimonialism. It was a really prescient call, right? And, humanity, after a lot of hemming and hawing, escaped that, right? After 100 years, escaped that. And here we are, the irony of ironies. The irony of ironies is not that the Russians are becoming more like us, but that we're becoming more like the Russians, right? We're going to the patrimonial regime that Putin built after the 1990s in Russia, right? That appears to have, for a whole range of leaders around the world, right? Not just Trump, right? Viktor Orban, Netanyahu in Israel, for a while, even Boris Johnson in Great Britain and others. This has a great deal of appeal. Why? It's not simply that it deals with the problems of late capitalism. It appears to address those in some way or another. It doesn't really do them very well. But there's a whole cultural element here that we've sort of forgotten, right? Putin's attack on LGBTQ rights, right? On what they called, and what Orban now calls gender ideology, right? The entire basis of kind of cultural modernity was attacked. And that has tremendous appeal for a large part of the American political, of the American citizenry, right? So the entire attack on on bathrooms, on pronouns, and all of that stuff, people underplay how angry the broad segments of the American public was about, and is about all of that, not having accepted these giant changes having to do with demography and cultural change that have occurred in the United States over the last 40 years. And so this patrimonial, remember the patrimonial ideal, it has a big cultural moment. It's a father, it's not a mother, right? There are not many female patrimonial leaders, for example. There's Meloni in Italy, but she's backed off the pure model, right? Even Marine Le Pen in France has sort of backed off the pure model of that. It's no accident that these patrimonial leaders are all these sort of narcissistic males. So Steve Hansen and I, we talked about this a lot. And, when we were using the word patrimonial, our agent didn't want us to use it. The presses were worried about it, right? Because of course it's this big, as John said, a big, ugly word, right? But at the end of the day, right, it not only describes what's going on inside of countries vis-a-vis their leadership, but also talks about the big cultural challenges to modernity that we're undergoing right now.
John, you've also spent a lot of your time on gay rights issues, gay marriage issues. You're well known for that. Is Jeff right? Is this ultimately, when you pare it all down, it's not just about someone wanting power, it's a reactionary cultural movement?
We're certainly seeing a reactionary cultural movement. Whether that's part and parcel of the patrimonialist project, which is to rewire government, so instead of being based on bureaucracies and rule of law, it's based on personal loyalty. I kind of think those things are separate, and that it's possible, for example, to have a left-wing patrimonial state. I don't know, Jeffrey, is that right?
There have been, for example, of course, Chavez, right, in Venezuela. But even in those left-wing patrimonial regimes, they can't really resist latching on to machismo, right? It's very, very difficult, right? Because they're really going back to they're hearkening back in many ways to a kind of a mythical past. Right? It's not, and I think you're right, John, and I'm glad you raised that the core here is really the challenge to the rule of law, to bureaucratic proceduralism. But there's a cultural moment in all of this, which is very important, I think, that shouldn't be forgotten. And we won't really grasp the entire thing. I mean, ours is just one pass at this. I'm sure others will go into it too. But I think there is a cultural moment here that needs to be attended to.
Well, you've both been very generous with your time. One final question to each of you, the same question. What are we supposed to do? Do we just fall back on our nostalgia for a rational legal state, for the bureaucracy that did exist, at least up until 2025? We had Tim Wu, John, on the show recently. He had an interesting long essay in Liberties on the need for a decentralized capitalism. You're a centrist. You're not even a progressive, but you're certainly closer to being a progressive than a Trumpian. What are progressives supposed to do? Are they supposed to just become conservative, or are they supposed to play the game too and reinvent themselves to be able to keep up with Trump and his patrimonialism? In other words, can there be if not a tolerant, open patrimonialism from the left, something that is able to compete with that in the 21st century?
Well, in the short term, as you know, in the article, I say that there is one overriding strategy that the left and the center and anyone who wants to oppose the imposition of this patrimonial regime should emphasize, and it's corruption. And it should be a message, an organized, systematic, coherent, day and night, nonstop message that this is the most corrupt presidency ever. First, because it is, and second, because historically, whether in the American progressive movement or in modern Ukraine, many other places, anti-corruption is how you take these guys down. That's something that people understand and do react to. So the first priority for the next 2 years, when Democrats have no power and progressives and centrists have no power, you go after corruption. In the longer term, what does the agenda look like? I think it's the good old-fashioned stuff that I know you and I have been around this bush once or twice before, Andrew, but I'm at Brookings. I still think that there's no substitute for trying to come up with better ideas that will help improve things for people and make stuff work better. And there is no shortage of those ideas, all kinds of things. They're not being done under this administration, but there is no shortage of ways to make the system work better for people. So that's, in the longer term, that's where we got to go. I think it's just old-fashioned spade work. But in the short term, you fight them on corruption.
Jeff, two things come to mind on this. Firstly, I'm always slightly upset with Michelle Obama for not running. I understand she didn't want to be president, but I think she had an obligation. And certainly a female matriarchal figure running against Trump would have been more interesting than the last election. And secondly, there are lots of digital progressives who argue that Doge actually isn't such a bad idea. It just needs to be done properly. So what are your thoughts on progressives coming up with 21st century alternatives to the kind of populist patrimonialism that seems to exist? And can we both reform the state and capitalism to keep up with the Leninists now in power in America?
Yeah. Well, in the first place, I wouldn't know how to label myself on all of that kind of progressive, liberal, whatever. But as a matter of principle, I don't think family dynasties are a good idea within politics, right? Either from the left or the right. I started off I was born in Canada, and so we have a Trudeau dynasty now in Canada, which appears to be kind of reaching its death throes in that country. I think there's a kind of I'll use John's thing, a short run, long run thing, right? But let me start with the long run first. In the long run, I think it's really important that we understand what the problem is, right? That it's not simply an attack on democracy. It's not simply a populist attack on democracy. Yes, that's a problem. But Steve and I do not disagree at all that that's a problem. But really, there's this bigger problem, and that's an attack on the organizations that keep the world, that make the world modern, right? And that's why patrimonialism matters. So we should need to label the thing correctly. That's number one. But I think in the short run, what I've seen in the last several weeks, very interesting, and you guys are more the journalists than I am, are these stories in the press that talk about what our civil servants actually do for us, right? The basic stories, right? The people at the Forest Service, the park rangers, the EPA, people who are doing the ordinary, quiet jobs, and what life is going to be like without them. What is it going to be like to have no tsunami alerts in Hawaii, right? What's that going to be like, right? We don't think about that very much, but I think it's important that many of these people are highly idealistic. Most of these people could have gone into the private sector and made a lot more money. Many of them are much smarter than Elon Musk, right? But they chose quiet lives of expertise to help others. My experience with government workers is that. Do we have, inefficiencies in government? Absolutely. But I put it to you, the mechanisms for finding those efficiencies are not to be found, right, in the crowd hanging around Elon Musk, much less a 21-year-old guy named Big Balls who's going to find us the giant efficiencies in government. And this is ridiculous. We're intelligent people here. We should actually improve what we have. The organizations that have made us healthy, wealthy, and relatively secure. We don't want to go back to a world in which life was, to quote one of your favorite theorists from the English Revolution, the Civil War, we don't want a life that is nasty, brutish, and short, And that's what it will be like without a modern state, right? The original theorist of the modern state, Thomas Hobbes, that's what he said. Look, the only alternative is if you don't have that modern state, life is going to be nasty, brutish, and short. And so these articles that are talking about depreciation for modern civil servants, I think we need to write those. And talented people like Roush need to write those more, because I think the American people need to be reminded of that, right? To be brought to it.
And actually, Michael Lewis has a new book coming out exactly on that subject. He's always very timely. So that will be the conversation. John Roush, Jeff Kopstein, thank you so much. We'll get you both back on. Fascinating conversation. This story is only just beginning. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Can I step on the sea?